So I ask people, what makes an adventure? And it's important to ask them this, because what we want to draw upon during a time of change is their resourcefulness, is their grit, is their ability to, their tenacity, their ability to see through this change and to find ways through it, to build that courage, that self-confidence in them as well. So I ask them what makes an adventure, and they'll tell me. And one of the things that always comes up is uncertainty, change, unexpectedness, surprise. And that's what people feel in organizational changes as well, except that it's not as exciting as some sort of travel one, which seems to be a little bit more, I guess, adventurous. But if we use this change metaphor as a perspective for what we're going on in our, what's going on in our organization or what's going on in our team, you can really get people to sort of shift their perspective from, I kind of hate this change, to, I'm excited by this. I want to see where this is going. I'd like to see what's happening from this one. So what makes an adventure? There's uncertainty, there's engagement. I was involved in it. I was excited by it. So then I bring it back to this concept of, we are in a changing world. I mean, there's lots of stuff changing: digitization, deflation, crypto, globalization, millennials in the workforce, climate change, plastics everywhere, Brexit's impact in Europe and its part of the world, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, a whole bunch of different things are happening. Stock markets are changing, organized politics, global politics are changing. And of course, we got COVID, who's come over the top of all of it, and all of that amidst our organizational change and restructure, and how do we get clients and how do we connect with people, all of these sorts of changes are happening as well. The biggest challenge, though, the biggest challenge is the speed of change.
Okay, so this conversation will be about getting into brave spaces, and our first question might be, how can we have conversations in which people could be braver? Maybe we can turn to the conversation architect first.
Inevitably. No, so how can we go and take people to a braver space? On a very basic level, just in a nutshell, it's a mixture of macro and micro. And I know that sounds very vague, but what I mean is there's a process orientation to how you set up the space itself, whether that's a virtual meeting or a face-to-face meeting or a workshop or whatnot. So the simple logistics of it, how many people are there, what sort of guidelines we've got set up. But then there's, on the micro level, there's some of those at the table dynamics, the back and forth, how we actually have the conversation and how we make it a space that's actually inclusive, where it's tending towards leadership and not loudership. So it's not just the lauded voices being heard, but it's not just inclusive in a checkbox kind of way, but we're genuinely making sure that all voices are coming up. This doesn't mean we don't have conflicts, but that those conflicts are moving towards the constructive side rather than that destructive side where the conversation's not progressing forward. But that would be, at the very basic level, it's attendance to that macro and micro level. And of course, there's a lot more to it than that, but that's the nutshell.
Yeah. So Kavita and Sarah, your thoughts on this? How leaders might play a role in creating that space?
My perspective would be the nonverbal one. And particularly, if we train our ability to read other people, we will feel safer, right? We will feel safer in our communication with them, because we'll pick up on their needs and we'll be more emotionally intelligent, and we will see those that don't have the loud voices will be seen, right? So more emotional intelligence would also create more safety. That would be my input. And we can talk more about that later, but I'm also a licensed mind trainer. It goes together, because the signals that we emit comes from somewhere, right? They come from our inside. So we cannot learn what positions to put on, because that's not how it works. It comes from the inside. So leaders to work with the self-confidence and all these strengths, personal development for their employees to feel more safer, right? To feel more safe. That will be so two directions. One working on the inside, and the other one working with the ability to read others.
Mm-mm. Okay, the ability to work on the inside. Okay, that's EQ. So working with yourself and working with others. Yeah,
Totally.
so what role, and I'd like to ask Kavita this question, does listening play, in terms of letting people be in their space, letting people be seen? Kavita?
Absolutely, thanks. Interestingly, as far as listening goes, that is one of the most important traits that a leader can have, because unless they are being listened to, people don't usually talk, and that's just basic human psychology. After a while, you'll just shut down and not contribute. So as far as listening goes, when you talk about deep listening, it also needs to be displayed very consistently within the teams, because that is when it does have maximum impact. For example, you could, Sarah referred to building trust within the team. You could actually build trust through consistent deep listening as well, because when people feel valued in an environment, when they feel respected, that is when they will, jump into conversations, into brainstorming sessions, and actually contribute fearlessly, right? So that is how you can actually use deep listening as a tool to convert a safe space into a brave space.
All right, so let's go straight to the point of what is leadership all about. Now let's talk about VUCA leadership. Now, you can call it VUCA. In the right pronunciation, we call it a VUCA. But if you want to have a little bit more power in that VUCA, I call it as VACA. All right, when you call it VACA, it sounds much more oomph. It sounds much more powerful. If you call it VUCA, it's different. Yeah, it's the same thing. It's not a much different in that pronunciation. Now, when we talk about this VACA leadership, now the first thing we need to understand is what is VUCA here. Now, when we talk about VUCA, we are talking about volatile, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. Now, we must understand these 4 letters, VUCA, is playing a very important role right now during this pandemic. Now, what is VUCA leadership? Now, you need to understand one thing. VUCA leadership is about a person, a leader who stands in the crisis. Now, you must bear this in mind that every one of us are leaders. No matter how high your position, how high class you are, whoever you are, you can be the lowest rank in the organization. We are all leaders. You will only know you are a leader when crisis hit you. When that crisis hit you, only then you got to know, then only you realize that you are actually a leader. Now, this debate has been going on that are you a leader or are you a born leader? We can't really answer this so much, but we need to understand when we are hit by crisis, that is where your leadership comes in.
I'm curious to know how you guys, how your teams are keeping track of one another, checking in on each other's well-being, and is that something that is actually part of the senior leadership dialogue? Is that something that's designed into the way your companies communicate?
So I'll take the question first.
Sure.
Obviously, the CEO sets the tone, right? And we still use email, and we're very clear in our emails about what's important for the company, and it's always about the employee first, right? We want our colleagues to know that above all, your needs, your individual needs, your family needs come almost before everything else, right? You've got to make sure that things are okay for you, that you are safe, your family is safe. You have recourse, you have your manager to turn to, and we empower managers to be flexible, to be adaptive, to be responsive to their colleagues' needs, right?
Dinesh, do you have anything to share on this topic of how your teams are checking in with one another and how you're keeping in touch?
So I think this year the topic of well-being became a priority, and it was cascaded from top down. So there was, so HR really, saw the need for it. There were lots of, there was a lot of concern from the countries, from global teams, from regional teams, and local teams as well. There were colleagues who were, raising up, and we've always had very open platforms. So there were pulse surveys that were being done to check in on people's, workload, their mindsets, their well-being, even their sales and all as well, to be able to assess how they were doing. And so the topic of well-being started to come up more and more, and so a whole program behind it was created. So it did show very clearly that, from top down, well-being was something that management was looking at, and it was cascaded down to line managers, in regions and in countries as well.
And John, what about over at GHL? I know that, unfortunately, I'm probably more familiar firsthand with some of the stresses that. So there's all kinds of stress upon stress for the teams, for your teams and the guys that you work with. I'm curious to hear how you guys are coping and how you guys are keeping tabs on how they're doing.
I guess I would agree with everyone, Miguel. The daily check-in would be part of our operating rhythm at GHL. I'm lucky in a way because I have been going to the office since December of last year, so that's daily. And majority of my team is in the office as well for operations, especially the warehousing side. But for those that are still working from home, obviously we've created so many chat groups. Here in the Philippines, what's big is Viber. So similar to WhatsApp, so Viber is pretty big here, both internally and externally. So there's a daily check-in when it comes to all those chat groups.
So that's pretty much, I think we've talked quite a bit about internal communications. I'm curious to know about external communications now. So if I could just hear first from Javed and talk about how Asia, I mean, on top of everything, you're also communicating a completely different business approach, right?
Right. Yeah, so for us, obviously, we got two components of our communication / marketing, which is something that's very close to Tony's heart. There is the social media channels of engaging, communicating with our customers. So the platforms that we use are all the social media platforms fundamentally. And then there's Tony Fernandez. Our balloon that we send up in the sky is Tony Fernandez. So we have these two channels, social media and Tony. And Tony can be on the news, in press, in print press, or on the social channels, and talking about products. When we're talking about products and driving revenue, it's Tony Fernandez. When we talk about services, quality, and our safety, which has been the big message that we want to talk about, that comes to me. And the various professional people that we have, whether it be pilots or engineers or scientists, they get wheeled out to talk about their specialities. And we use those subject matters in that sense. And that can be on social media, can be in these sorts of forums, can be on LinkedIn particularly, that we heavily use, or it can be in the press as well.